Welcome to the Odds Breakers, number one place for shared, sharp betting information.
Welcome back to podcast 35 of 2021. I'm your host, Kiev O'Neill. You can follow me on Twitter at OBKiev. Follow us at The Odds Breakers. And follow us on social media /The Odds Breakers. This episode is being brought to you by MyBookie.ag. For a 50% sign-up bonus, please visit MyBookie and use the promo code The Odds Breakers. Terms, conditions, location apply. If you'd like to help us out with our costs, sponsor the website and the podcast, we'd love to help you out. Please visit theoddsbreakers.com, click shop, and become a member. For $24.99 a month, you get my premium plays before the line moves. If nothing else, please visit theoddsbreakers.com and become a free picks newsletter subscriber. And man, have our free picks been fantastic with guys like Chris Farley throwing them out there, having one of the most fantastic NBA seasons that I've ever seen. He's also killing it in MLB and in the UFC. And he's coming on our show today to talk a little bit about what he does and how he does it. I'm really excited to bring Chris on. We are also going to get into a little bit of UFC 262. Huge card in the UFC this weekend. I might even have two podcasts dedicated to that, because we're also going to be coming back with some special guests tomorrow for the Preakness Stakes coming up on Saturday. So before we bring Chris on, I want to talk a little NFL, because the schedules have just came out. Well, we're kind of working it right now. They're releasing the games right now. Real interesting. Bears play at the Rams for your Sunday night football. We have the Cowboys against the Tampa Bay Bucks for the first game of the season on Thursday. And the books already have lines coming out for NFL Week 1. That's how fast they come out nowadays. And there's some weakness in some of these lines. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty. Heck, even the Packers are only dogs by 2.5 points when we have no idea what's happening to Aaron Rodgers at the Saints coming up on Week 1. So I find that very interesting. It looks like the Ravens are also going to be playing a Sunday night game, according to this, against the Raiders. And if the Bears game sucks, obviously you can switch back and forth to that. Maybe you'll see some offense from the Raiders. Maybe you won't see much. So the Raiders are kind of one of those teams that have to finally prove it now after, all the moves they've been made. I think it's John Gruden's 4th year as Raiders head coach. What's Jacksonville doing? The reason I ask is because they're kind of becoming the Kardashians of the NFL here. Obviously, they had the first round pick. They hired Urban Meyer from college. He was coaching Ohio State forever, won championship. And he won championships at Florida, who happened to be coaching Tim Tebow at the time. And now Tim Tebow wants to come back to football and play tight end. Okay, it's funny because the dude's been out of football for like over 8 years and he tried to play baseball, and now he sees his old coach going to coach somewhere. His old coach is probably just can't say no to the kid. Maybe he does get cut, but heck, he already got good reviews for his workout. This is like, hey coach, now that you're in the NFL, nobody else wants me. Can I please have my last opportunity? That's what this kind of feels like with Urban Meyer over there. And it just makes it even that much more of a soap opera with Jacksonville, because you have a college coach that ran kind of a spread type system at Ohio State that's been proven many times to not work in the NFL. Now he's going to try to make it work. And now he's going to have one of the most controversial quarterbacks ever next to Kaepernick come back and play a different position.
Unreal.
The irony of this whole dang thing is that we were screaming at Tim Tebow to play tight end years ago when he was on the Broncos and when he was on the Jets. But he didn't do that. You know what's really funny about Tebow is he actually won a bunch of games at the Broncos, but everyone knows it was mostly the defense, and craziness has happened at the end of those games. But at the same time, the kid is kind of a winner. But he's also a massive distraction now. Massive distraction, right? And I don't know if it's worth it for any football team to go through it like that. Now he's coming back to be a tight end. What the hell happens if Trevor Lawrence starts out just a little bit shaky, right? Just a little shaky. Maybe throws a couple picks. What are people going to start saying? Don't overestimate the intelligence of the average NFL fan, especially the average NFL Tebow fan. They might start screaming for Tebow to play if Jacksonville starts out 0-3, which we all know Jacksonville only won 3 games last year. Very dangerous. New situation, new quarterback. I don't care if he is the best coming out of college. New coach, and all of this distraction. I mean, the only thing that could make this better for a reality show person is for them to go on Hard Knocks. Now, they're not eligible for Hard Knocks because I believe you can't do that to a brand new coached team, but I believe they could volunteer for it still. So, I mean, that would just make it that much sweeter for the people that love drama and distractions. For me, I do not like distractions, and it's not Tebow's fault that he got treated this way. It's mostly the media's fault and how they treated Tebow. It's his fault for coming back now after he had the opportunity to be a tight end, in my opinion. But he comes with all this baggage, and I'm not even sure if the baggage is his fault, but the truth is it's still there, right? How is Urban Meyer going to approach this? Well, what are the other teammates going to think when they're going to Tim Tebow, asking him a bunch of stupid questions, taking the camera off of them? A guy that might make the third string as a tight end. Maybe he'll play on special teams. Who the hell knows? Maybe he'll have some stupid gadget plays as well. But at the same time, I am completely against this move as an organization for Jacksonville just because I can't see how it can make your football team any better. Even if he's a decent tight end, there's just so many tight ends out there, and there's so many tall guys out there that can run and block and that are faster than him and maybe even stronger. Tebow's a very strong guy, don't get me wrong. You've seen him. He's jacked. He wears those medium shirts to help show it. But at the same time, just because you're going to be nice to your guy that played for you for Florida is not a good enough excuse to have him make the team and bring all this distraction to your football team. As a player, you start losing confidence in a coach that does that. So that's my 2 cents about Tim Tebow. As the days go on, I'm going to be working on NFL season win totals and a preview for you guys. Every single division we're going to cover. Talk about the Pythagorean win total that we came up with. Going to talk about the difference in power ratings, some of the major changes, how the draft went, how the schedule looked from last year, how the schedule looks from this year. Pretty much everything that has to do with NFL football. That's going to be coming up throughout the next weeks and months, and we're also going to be getting some college football involved as well. That's what we do in the summer. We don't talk a lot about baseball. We do bet it, and I spend every single night or morning handicapping baseball. We're actually doing pretty well in baseball, so I'm happy about that. But the NFL is king, and college football is right there next for me. So real excited to get to work for you guys on that. Without further ado, let's bring on Chris Farley from theoddsbreakers.com. And now I'm very excited to welcome back a man who has been crushing it in the NBA, UFC, and Major League Baseball all season long, our very own Mr. Chris Farley from theoddsbreakers.com. You can follow him on Twitter at ChrisRFarley1. Chris, man, thanks for coming back on. How's your week treating you so far?
Oh, it's treating me very well. Really honored and awesome to be back on again with you, Kiev. The first year, obviously, I've been doing this a while, but for you to give me the opportunity for me to, write and to put my bets out there for the NBA and for it to be going this well. I mean, I'm I think we're 21-6 over the last 6 days. So we're really streaking and, holding on to that 57-58% on the year. So things are great. I mean, I can't complain when it's going that well in the volatile NBA,
Oh, for sure. And the NBA is tough, and you're right now you're doing just as good or better than anybody I've seen this year. So you're just a phenomenal year, man, and I want to congratulate you on that. And your baseball is looking great too. It must feel good to be having such fire on all your sports.
Yeah, I mean, the baseball, I had a bad night last night. I'm always looking for value, and I think that's, the thing, especially with baseball in the beginning of the season. I know a lot of the dogs were hitting, so I was just trying to find angles and, ways to make our readers money in the sense because we don't really have it all figured out yet. I'm not at the level of some of the other handicappers out there with their like extremely deep knowledge. So I'm just trying to find value, but that's been going pretty well. But the NBA is definitely a little bit of a cash cow these past few weeks or the past few months, really. So I'm grateful for it because the ball doesn't always bounce your way.
Well,
even if you have good handicapping. So.
Oh, for sure. And I'll tell you this, don't sell yourself short. Even the experts in the MLB do not have it figured out either. So
yeah, right.
It's just so much. I mean, some of these teams are not doing what they're supposed to do. Some teams are overachieving. I mean, the Boston Red Sox, who expected the Boston Red Sox to be doing, obviously the Baltimore Orioles are different. The Phillies are just so hard to figure out for people. It's just all over the board. So Major League Baseball has been challenging for many. We're fortunate enough to be doing well in it now too. 8-2 our last 10 plays for myself, that is, when I say we. So really happy about that. But talking about the NBA, you've been just crushing it, and it's going to be interesting next week because sounds like they're going to have a play-in tournament for the for the playoffs. That's just fantastic as it is, man. And I'm guessing you're going to do an NBA preview for that, aren't you?
Yeah, I'd like to put up a pod probably Monday on just that NBA playoff preview. Maybe I'll put out there some, I guess the way I'm thinking about it now is I'll put like likelihood by percentages of the teams that I think could make it to the finals. We'll just kind of attack it from that angle. I'm personally, I'm not a big fan of the play-in tournaments because I mean, the long season as it is, and some of these teams don't even take it that seriously throughout, and the motivational letdowns and angles that, I mean, it just aren't even there, because, I mean, it just, like a team like the Clippers, for example, half the games it felt like Kawhi and Paul George were out. So now you just have another reason for teams not to be in the top 8. We got a top 10 now who can get in. But it should make for some exciting games at least, and that's more opportunity for us.
Oh, for sure. And exciting probably for the viewer and the fans of teams that weren't coming in, but the teams that were going to make it anyway, aka the Lakers, and a couple other ones are probably like, well, geez, is it a 1-game elimination here?
I think so. I'll be honest with you. I don't have it. I know it's 4 teams, so I think it's 3 games total. So the first 2 teams that win then face each other in the final game. In each conference. I believe that's how it goes. But I have a little interesting tidbit on the Lakers a little bit later. The Lakers could squeeze out of that 7th spot still, and I think they actually have a good chance at doing that, which is very typical for the Lakers and LeBron to just sneak out of that little play-in tournament. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, it's pretty tight in both conferences as far as who's going to make it. I think the Pacers and the Hornets both clinched it last night, the play-in tournament, so they're both in that scenario. But there's still plenty up in the air, and we only have at most 3 or 4 games for most teams.
Oh, for sure. So it looks like the 7th and 8th seed in this play-in tournament is going to have a little bit more opportunity than the 9th and 10th seeds, according to what I'm reading right now. It looks like they get the 8th and 7th and 8th get 2 chances, and the 9th and 10th highest winning percentage, the loser of the 7-8 game will host the winner of them. And so I'm guessing the other one is out. But we'll get some more information on that a little bit later since it's so new to everybody. So the motivation should be there for everybody, though, at least. It's playoff time, especially when it's like single game elimination for some of these guys. They're going to be trying to win this game. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the NBA then. And you already hinted a little bit on the Lakers. What makes the NBA unique when it comes to sports betting in general?
Well, I think for me, the first thing that came to mind when I saw you ask that question is that it's the injuries, it's the the resting, and I don't mean to sound like I'm complaining about it, but it is really tough. I mean, in any sport, virtually that I can think of, you have a good idea of who's going to play and who's going to not play, especially the star players, well before the game is actually happens. In these NBA games, we'll be lucky if, an hour before tip-off, we know everybody who's in the game. So it just makes it hard. Obviously, the point of sports betting and of handicapping in a sharp sense is to get the best line available, to get the best number. And it's really tough to get that. I mean, I want to wake up every morning, 7, 8 a.m., or even the night before, and I'll already be handicapping these games, already have an angle. But you could put so much work into that. And then the next day, half the team isn't playing or just a few crucial players aren't playing. So it just really throws you off. So it's been, I've succeeded in sort of waiting, which is, not the typical strategy. But I'll almost always put out my write-ups at the odds breakers later in the afternoon because you really have to, unfortunately, most of the time, take that line in the afternoon once you know all the available information. And sometimes, like I said, that's not until 5, 6, 7 o'clock.
Eastern time.
So,
right.
Yeah, right. Eastern time. So that's been really challenging, but it's also sort of made it nice to sort of, most of the time to wait. And obviously, in these games this week and going into next week in the playoffs, when motivation is not as much of a question, and all of a sudden, all these players are, healthy and, ready to go and don't seem to have a bunch of injuries, the small injuries that are keeping them out. Then it'll be much easier to get those early lines and that early value. But yeah, when I saw that question, the first thing that came to mind is that resting portion and the injury portion and the uncertainty before these games, it can just really throw you off, especially this year. I think this is just the new NBA.
Right.
But so I don't think it's going away anytime soon. But it's frustrating, but you can also take advantage of it if you think if you get on those lines as soon as that information comes out.
Which makes it very unique too, because when it comes to an NFL line, obviously
right.
When the line comes out in the middle or later towards the week, which is the time because it comes out so early, it's about a week lag instead of a day lag for NBA and MLB. That's when you're stale. It's kind of like, okay, the sharpest people have hidden it. You're not going to get the value unless you possibly wait and hopefully the public moves it some or hope some more information comes out. But with the NBA, it's almost like the sharper people take it later because you have to have all your information first, instead of making mistakes or guesses, right? You can cost yourself a big chunk of your profit if you're just guessing that somebody's going to play when they might not. So that's so interesting. It's like the better line is later, like 3/4 of the way through, I would say. That is very unique. So great answer to that. That's kind of what I was thinking. So what's different about your approach in handicapping the NBA compared to college basketball?
Well, first of all, I don't ever remember having to really check on injuries in college basketball. You have a pretty good idea of that well before game time usually. But I would say, and again, maybe I'll talk more about this later, but motivation is a huge difference. In the NBA, what I've noticed is you kind of have a new school and an old school group of NBA players in there right now. So, you have the Chris Pauls and you have the LeBrons. For all the people that hate LeBron, he's way more old school than a lot of these new kids. And so you just have some teams like the Knicks and the Suns and the Jazz. They don't sit players. If they have a legitimate injury, sure. But there's that real difference. And, in college basketball, you're rarely concerned about the motivation. If there's a motivation concern, then it's an obvious spot. Maybe they don't need a game, before the tournament or something. But in NBA, that's the first thing that comes to mind. And the second thing is the NBA is such a star-driven league. I mean, I think about the Luka Garzas and the Cade Cunninghams and Jared Butler on Baylor. These are great players in college basketball, and sure, at times they took over games, but for the most part, you didn't necessarily handicap a game solely because of that one player on that team. Whereas in the NBA, if Kawhi and Paul George are starting for the Clippers, if LeBron, like last night, he was supposed to play, and then he was announced a few hours before tip-off that he's not playing. I mean, one or two players, there's just a huge margin between the best players in the world and the rest of the NBA. They're all great players, but if Steph Curry is playing for the Warriors, if his finger or whatever's bothering him isn't an issue in a particular game, that's going to change the way that you're going to handicap that game. Whereas I don't think that you can't really approach college basketball exactly that same way. I mean, there are star players in each team, but it doesn't have the same gravity. It doesn't, so I think, especially in a star-driven, player-driven league where the coaches almost sometimes barely seems like the coaches matter. Those star players are really crucial. And I think the Timberwolves are a great example of that. They've been actually playing really well. I mean, they sucked on the year, but they've been winning games. They've been upsetting great teams, and that's because they're finally healthy. They have D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns. They're all back in the team, and they're having fun, and it makes a huge difference in how you handicap their games.
Oh, definitely. And, it's funny about college when there's a big injury, like a big player going out, the rest of the college team, the next game, they play out of their minds. The rest of the team does that because they get that one bump of the guy being out, being like, well, it's up to us now. In the NBA, the rest of the team, they're not going to feel that motivation because they're probably making the playoffs anyway, which is a series, right? In general, and they have more opportunities to later. It's not so important that you're playing for a high seed. And in college, they can kind of make it up a little bit more. There's less time in the game, and the NBA, they just like you said, rely a lot more on those big names. So motivation, a huge part of it. So great answer there. I totally agree with it. It made massive difference between the stars being out in the NBA and the star being out in college. Villanova, one of their stars is out. They might even be better the next game. You never know, right? And so good points. What websites do you use for information when you do handicap the NBA? If you can obviously divulge that information, are they similar to like the Ken Poms and the Bart Torvik's efficiency based, or are they completely different?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, I have a very simple method that I do every day. I sit in the same spot on my dining room table because that's kind of my office these days in this virtual world. My German Shepherds to my right usually, and I set up the same exact sites every day. So I have the Hollinger or Hollinger, or I don't know how you pronounce it, but I think it's Hollinger metrics. I get them through ESPN, and it's like a team metric where it values, offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, pace, pure shooting ability, assist ratio, all those, the more fine-tuned stats, that just, the totals won't give you. And then I also have team stats up, so points per game, points allowed per game, and point differential. And then I always have some kind of ATS stat up. And then I just look at the box scores and I make sure, a big part of my handicapping is always what has the schedule looked like recently for these teams. Last night, for example, a big reason why I love the Lakers is because the Knicks were off of a brutal road stretch. I think it was six or seven straight road games, and they were facing teams like Denver and Utah and the Clippers, and the Lakers were the last leg of that. And, the Knicks usually aren't, they're the best ATS team in the NBA, actually. So they're not a team that you would question their motivation. But, as humans, as human beings, at the end of that long road trip, they're about to finally get back home. And they really don't need that game in the same way that the Lakers did. So even without LeBron James, the Lakers still won. So I really make sure that I pay attention to their schedules and to spots. And, that, of course, that varies because maybe it's a rivalry or, maybe just one guy on one team doesn't like another guy on another team, so that's part of the motivation too. Sure, like the Lakers have a back-to-back tonight from last night against the Knicks. They're facing the Rockets tonight, but is that a tough back-to-back for the Lakers? I don't think so. I think they're still at home, so it varies. But I really do pay attention to the schedule and kind of what's upcoming for these teams and what has just happened for these teams, because I dare say I do find that the NBA is a more, emotional maybe league than others. If, Kyrie and Durant just got their ass kicked 2 or 3 games in a row, it's likely that they're going to come out, pissed off and that game is going to look different. So, of course, all sports are psychology and emotions and everything, but I just think things are a little less cerebral in the NBA at times, and you can really value and find the right angle just by looking at what that team has been through last.
All right. Well, good stuff on that. Is there, I guess you kind of explained it. You look at the motivation.
Yeah.
Is there a specific way you handicap motivation itself, or is it kind of like you probably don't quantify it, right? You kind of just thinking, this is a team I want to buy in this situation, depending upon, as long as the spread's within something. Or this is a team I want to fade in this situation because the spread, unless the spread's around a certain degree, right?
Right. I don't always assign a number. That's really tough to do because there's just so many intangible things going on. But as far as motivation, recently we've been looking at playoff positioning, and then you just have the team's health, their travel schedule. Sometimes it's like holidays, with the rivalries or players returning from injury, or just simply just trying to get off the schneid. The motivational angles really vary, so it's kind of hard to calculate or computate that. But yeah, you explained it well. I think I just have play on and play off teams, and some of that it kind of comes along with just having historical knowledge from every single day. I wondered if I should even say this because I don't want to devalue anything, but I haven't been able to watch as many NBA games as I've wanted to this year. I've watched plenty, but it's wedding season for me. There's a lot going on, so but I make sure that I'm just unfortunately sometimes at night, which can annoy the fiance, but I'm checking in, I'm following the scores, I'm looking at the box score, and I'm just historically paying attention to the trends of these teams. And I know that sounds a little nebulous, but if you're just historically paying attention, you kind of see what these teams are all about. I've tried to sort of write my own narratives about each team and what I come to expect from them, and then I just value all the other motivational angles around that. Yeah,
it's a greater understanding for the teams. You don't have to watch every game. No handicapper watches every game. If they say that, they're probably lying. The thing is, the truth is, the NBA, in my opinion, and you can probably be a little bit more qualified because I haven't bet it. I haven't consistently, came up with my own numbers. Is that the motivation's more important than the metrics? For the NBA, if somebody's just concentrating on the pure metrics and they're losing, they're going to be scratching their heads. Why? It's because you have to factor in the situations more, and that's what you've been doing such a great job of, Chris. And that's why I wanted to point that out, man. I think that's a huge part of it, and I think people oversimplify things. I think people look at situations and ignore it when they shouldn't be ignoring it, right? And I think you're able to smell that out, which is more of an art to this approach and handicapping the NBA in general than it is a science, isn't it?
Yeah, I think when it boils down to it, I love psychology. I love people. I thought about being a psychologist at one point. Now, of course, my fiance is, so I see what she goes through, and I'm glad I'm not. But
I hate to be questioned by her, man.
She keeps me in line for sure. But yeah, man, it's just watching these players, watching these teams, and you can really, I definitely try to put it in calculated terms in the articles and everything, but it just really does depend on how much effort and how much attention that you're paying to these teams and just what they're doing on a long-term basis. And I totally agree with what you said about not oversimplifying it. I think, we're in a obviously statistical world and a data-driven world, and it's really easy like to get really caught up in that. But there's a real human element, and I would say maybe even more significantly in a league like the NBA or in an association like the NBA, because there's such small teams. A lot of these kids worked their ass off and didn't come from much, and they have the whole world, in front of them now, and some of them handle that, better than others. And of course that's true in all pro sports, but I do think that there's, because it's so much about the players, you really have to be invested in the trends and patterns that the players themselves show you, and then I think I've done well because I didn't question that as much, but if I ever question that too much, that's usually when I lose my place.
Well, in that case, what advice would you give the novice handicapper on starting to bet the NBA?
I guess I would say I caution, bettors out there from just being too married to any trends or stats. Every game is different, and a lot of it depends on that daily research and historical knowledge. And like I said, I've tried to develop narratives of every team throughout the season. Like if you would just ask me about any team, I could give you like a thesis statement to what I think of them from what I've watched. And I think that's important because in spots, if these motivational angles really matter, they're going to matter more for some teams than other teams. So some teams are going to be able to show a little more resilience, and get past it, whether that's because of the leadership they have or just the excellence and talent that they have in their teams. Whereas other teams are going to be really more susceptible to those spots and situations. So I would encourage everyone, similar to power ratings, but just, in my way, I do it more with less numbers and more, narrative, but develop some type of narrative for every NBA team. I don't know how people like Kiev do it with college basketball, all the damn teams you have in college basketball. That's a whole nother, universe. But at least in the NBA, you got 30 teams, and you can really, sort of, peek under the, the blanket, if you will, or look at these teams for really who they are and, examine them over the long term, and then you'll have more confidence in your plays.
Oh, for sure. Well, college basketball, it's still an animal. It's certainly matchup based. Turnovers and 3-pointers are the biggest things you really look at. Obviously, if a short team is playing a tall team, you have to figure out who's going to win out in what type of situations and how they defend the perimeter and things like that. So we can go into a whole statement and story about that. But I kind of like what you said here. When it comes to certain teams being more susceptible, in the NFL, you might downgrade a point for travel, right? Just to everybody across the board. But in the NBA, if something happened to another team and it's emotional, the points are going to be more if they're more susceptible to these motivational challenges, right? For example, if somebody loses their player, it might not affect a team like the Lakers or the Clippers or the Denver Nuggets as much as it would possibly affect an up-and-coming team like the Knicks, right?
Yeah.
I don't know as much about the NBA, but I know a little bit. What's another up-and-coming team? Maybe the Hawks or something? Hawks, maybe?
Pacers, yeah.
Okay. So I think that it's much more of a situation where you can even look for the market to overvalue a motivational spot, and you can come back on the other side of it too. So good stuff there, man. Very, very good stuff. So to close out the NBA, Chris, do you have a play for our listeners tonight for the NBA card?
I do. I have at least one or two plays, and if I may, I have a few trends that I'd like to just mention quickly.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
As the season is wrapping up, some of those bad teams are really just mailing it in. So a team like the Cavs, for example, the Cleveland Cavaliers are 1-13 in their last 14 games ATS. And they have the Celtics and Wizards and Nets in their final 3 games. Now, of course, it depends on how much the Celtics and the Nets in particular want to win. The Wizards are probably going to blow them away. We'll have to look at that line. But 8 of those 13 losses have been by at least 16 points. So the Cavs are routinely getting their ass kicked, and they don't seem to really care about it. Same thing with the Thunder. They're 3-8 in their last 11 ATS. and they're at a horrendous 11-22-1 ATS at home. They have the Jazz and the Clippers to end their season. And the Rockets are also an abysmal 8-27 ATS at home. And they have the Lakers, Clippers, and Hawks, all, again, formidable teams. Lakers face the Rockets tonight. I haven't looked at that line just yet, but I imagine it's probably pretty big, and they deserve it to be pretty big. A line or a game that I'm looking at today is the Celtics and the Cavs at Cleveland. The Celtics are one of the more volatile teams in the NBA. Of course, they just lost Jaylen Brown for the season, which really stings for them because, I mean, he's probably having his best career year. I think that he's averaging more points than he ever has. So that's a big blow to the team. But the Celtics are so confusing because they do have a good amount of talent that you would think could be able to compete and, stay in the upper echelon of the Eastern Conference, and they just don't. They just blow games. They just blew 2 games to the Heat, and the Heat looked like a really, dominant team over them throughout that game. Eventually the Heat just overwhelmed them. So the Celtics need to get right. I'm not seeing a line where I'm looking right now on the Celtics and Cleveland game, but I just have a feeling that the Celtics are probably going to blow. I mean, it's probably going to be like a 15 to 20 point win for Boston. If Boston is going to get an easy win to end the season, it's going to be tonight. So look at that line, and if it's under 10 or 11, I would definitely consider a play in the Celtics. The Spurs and the Nets are really interesting tonight because the Spurs are still vying. I think they're in the 10th spot in the West still, so they need to keep on winning. But the Nets don't want to, limp into the playoffs. So that's an interesting one. I haven't really looked at that one yet, but I would lean to Brooklyn's side. They are at home, and as far as we know, Kyrie and Durant are not sitting tonight. And then you have the Wizards and the Hawks, and Wizards games have just gone over. I saw a stat on Twitter, and I'm sorry that I can't echo it, but I've written in my articles about it. The Wizards are just having no issues scoring over, 216, 220, 230, 225. It's like every game. And a lot of Hawks games have gone over recently too. So I would look at the over. I think it was at 239. It's probably above that now, which is an insane number, but it's not that insane these days in the NBA.
All right. Let's get into a little UFC then. And there's a huge event coming up this weekend, as we all know, UFC 262. Holy cow, there's some good fights on here, Chris. Have you got a chance to take a look at it?
Yes. So my wedding shower, well, I guess it's, Caitlin's wedding shower is on Saturday, and we're going to have a bunch of family here, and that is not going to stop me from ordering this fight. I'm still going to watch it late at night, even if I'm watching by myself. So yes, I'm very, very excited about it. I think this is one of the better cards we've seen in a while. And I'm really excited for I guess it's probably the co-main event, right? I mean, Chandler and Oliveira, and then Ferguson and what's his name?
Beneil Dariush. Yeah, he's a great fighter, but that's a tough matchup for him. And we can start right there if you like.
Sure. So I really like a bunch of underdogs on this card. I just think there's a lot of value that we all may want to look at. I'm seeing at Bovada right now, Ferguson is at plus 150. I realize Ferguson is 37 years old and he didn't look good in 2020. I think he lost 2 fights. But I do think that for Dariush, Ferguson is a big step up in class. As long as we still see the Tony, as long as there's still remnants of the Tony of the past, which he does not get tired, he's constant. I think there's a good chance that he could overwhelm Dariush, who just doesn't have the same athleticism as a Tony Ferguson. Now, again, even as I'm saying this, I'm kind of talking about Tony Ferguson from a few years ago. But I still think this is excellent value for a guy who, if he's going to turn it around, if he's going to come back and still be competitive, this is the time to do it, or else people are really going to start to mail him in. So I hopefully we see a motivated Tony. If we see a motivated Tony Ferguson, I like a small play on him on the money line.
Yeah, you're getting plus money here. And we've both been on Dariush for a long time, and now you see him as this monster favorite against a legend like Tony Ferguson. You're like, oh dear, what's going on here? Well, Ferguson is older; he is 37 years old, and Dariush isn't. I thought he'd be younger. He's 32. Still young enough and in his prime, though. But can Ferguson get back to what he was? He did lose his last 2 fights against Justin Gaethje, which is completely acceptable because, in my opinion, Justin Gaethje under, well, let's just say Khabib, is the best fighter. I think it's Gaethje. I don't think it's Dustin Poirier in that weight class. So I think his other loss against Charles Oliveira, who is fighting in the main event against Michael Chandler, which will also be awesome, is also somewhat forgivable. But he did make it, in the distance or to the distance. It was a unanimous decision for Charles Oliveira against him. And so, you kind of wonder, is he getting a little old? I don't know, but he is always been quick. Look at his Anthony Pettis, Rafael Dos Anjos, Edson Barbosa, great wins, and then you have to go way back to 2012 if you want to go to his last loss before the Gaethje and Oliveira fights, right? So, he was on just a mad tear, former champion, for a long time. The question is he still going to be motivated? Because I do know that Dariush will be motivated here. This is a big step for him. This is his next step to fight Poirier, in my opinion here. And maybe Gaethje does get passed up. I don't know. Obviously, you still have McGregor there lurking. But, in my opinion, Dariush, I was really excited for him to come up here, but I was not excited to see him at this much of a favorite at minus 175. Okay. And I don't know what the public's going to do on this one. Actually, I'm not even thinking that's going to be much movement. So, in my opinion, I can see just so many different things happening. I'm going to be rooting for Dariush because, I've been making money off him. So how do you not root for him, right? It's been a while since I bet on Tony's because he lost value so long ago, right? So I'm going to stay off this one for now. I understand your play on Ferguson, and I don't necessarily disagree with that price. So good stuff there, man. I'm going to move on to the main event then. Let's talk about that since we touched on it here. And this is real interesting because Michael Chandler is fighting I think Charles is the top 2 or 3 in this weight class. And this weight class at 155 is absolutely stacked, isn't it, Chris? Geez, the amount of fighters in this weight class, that's so good. But, if you look at Oliveira, his record's fantastic. And Chandler, he's 22-5. But it's not like he's been in the UFC that long. He was fighting in the Bellator for most of his day, and he was really good in the Bellator, but he also lost 3 fights ago in 2019, about 2 years ago. Obviously, we had COVID. He got KO'd by some bum, a guy I never heard of, Patricio Ferreri or whatever. And then, he won the last 3 before that, but then back in 2017, he got TKO'd in a doctor stoppage here. That fight against Dan Hooker, I saw it, and he got all cocky and called out McGregor. I don't know if you remember that. UFC, it was UFC 257. And, then McGregor all of a sudden lost to Poirier, so, I don't know if that had any effect on him. Probably not. But at the same time, it's like you beat Dan Hooker. Yeah, and Dan Hooker did pretty well. He beat a couple big guys, and he lost to some bums. But I didn't think that much of him. I do think a lot more of Oliveira, and he's 30-8. He's been around a while, but he's just he reminds me of Israel Adesanya a little bit. He's kind of that wormy guy. Can't get a piece of him. He's got a good ground game, and he's definitely fought in a lot better competition than Michael Chandler. He's fought in guys like Tony Ferguson, as we just discussed, right? Nick Lentz. He hasn't lost since 2017 against Paul Felder, and Felder was no pushover here. And then, it's just ever since that loss, he has won 8 fights in a row, and he kept kind of stepping up, and he's a top-ranked guy. Now, the thing is that I like him, but I think this fight should be minus 110. I think the prop odds. Now, if I'm a Vegas lines maker, I'm not going to make it minus 110 because I know the public's going to bet Chandler, so I'm going to make it Chandler minus 130, somewhere around there, where actually Chandler is about plus 115. And so I think this switched a little bit too. I think if I look a couple days ago, I think Chandler was actually favored. But Oliveira is now at minus 135 here. It's not it kind of took me off it a little bit. So I don't have an opinion yet. And I want to see how much the public comes in on Chandler before I decide to make a bet on it. Do you have any thoughts on this fight?
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I am pretty bullish about this one, actually. I'm going to kind of go off the cuff and not even, I wouldn't ask any of the listeners to even, approach betting this way. But when I saw Michael Chandler against Hooker, and I know Hooker was spending time away from his family, he was in a tough spot, probably towards the end of his, his run, if he had any. Michael Chandler, at least at this stage in the game, just looks like somebody who's built a little differently. He has a very low center of gravity, explosive power, like insane athleticism. I like Oliveira as well. I mean, I think he's on an 8-win streak, and he deserves this spot. He's never been able to win the big one. Actually, this might be his first title shot, right? So he was never really given the chance. But on the bright lights, a few times he did fail in the past before the fight streak. But I just think Michael Chandler, I saw something in him, and I'm not claiming to be like a fighter myself, but I know he has an intense wrestling background. I think he's like a 3-time All-American with power that you can't teach. I think Oliveira is the more technical striker. He's probably the better. He's gonna be hard to catch, but I don't think that he's gonna be able to get Chandler on the mat. I don't think he's gonna be able to control anything there. And I know he's an expert in submissions, but the low center of gravity for Chandler and the way that he explodes and how amped and motivated he seems. As soon as I saw this line and as soon as I saw that he was a dog, I knew that I was going to take advantage of it because I don't think he should be the underdog. I think he feels like he has a lot to prove because he is new in the UFC, which could be an advantage. To put his name out there, he doesn't want to lose his second fight in the UFC. And this is absolutely going to be a premium pick of mine on Saturday. I'm not sure how many stars I'm going to give it, but I have a pretty great feeling about Chandler in this one, and that is to no discredit of Oliveira. I think Chandler is in a different state of mind right now.
So he does. Michael Chandler reminds me a little bit of Volkanovski. Alexander Volkanovski, yes. One weight class down. He's stocky. He's got those thick legs, and he did beat up Hooker quite badly. I mean, he beat the crap out of him. I thought it was going to end before it did. Even it's almost like he was toying with him, and he was all pumped up, did the backflip or whatever. Called out McGregor. But I'm just thinking that if Oliveira can I think he's a better fighter than Dan Hooker, first of all, and I think he's could catch Chandler. Now if Chandler over pursues, maybe that would be his downfall. But he does scare me a little bit, like you said. I mean, here's what I will say: I think you're on the right side of the line move. I think there's going to be a lot of public money coming in on Chandler. So getting it right now, if you do like Chandler, is probably the right move. And your handicap was good. Don't get me wrong. You made me you had me thinking about Chandler at the plus money a little bit. So then I quickly talked myself back out of the points why I'm staying away as of right now. But to be honest with you, I would not make Oliveira a favorite. I would make it exactly minus 110 apiece. And I would actually make Chandler the favorite because I think that's where the money's going to come in. So I think the books might be a little bit susceptible here when this happens. But everyone's looking at Chandler's record, just like I mentioned. And what did you do for me? Well, everyone that saw Chandler fight, just like we both did, maybe that's the right side. So right now I'm going to stay away from that one, and hopefully you win it, buddy. I'll be rooting for you if I don't make a bet on Oliveira. So there you go. I have a quick one I want to talk about here. And it has to do with another fighter that's been around for a very long time, and his name is Edson Barboza, right? And it's cool to see him fighting here because, he's been there for a long time. 35 years old, 21 wins, 9 losses, 12 KOs, 1 submission, and 8 decisions. He likes to KO his opponents. We're talking 145 weight class, so 1 step under Chandler there. And, he's got a fight with Shane Burgos over here, right? And Shane Burgos, 13-2. So he's kind of the up-and-coming guy himself. He likes to put on some mean faces there. Here's what I'm looking at here. You have Barboza. He is an actual dog to Shane here, right? And Shane's got a little bit of the hype. But in my opinion, Shane hasn't nearly fought the guys that Barboza has fought. Barboza lost 4 of his last 6 fights. This is against Dan Ige, Paul Felder, so we talked about earlier, Justin Gaethje, Khabib, and Kevin Lee's there, but he also whipped Dan Hooker himself, just like Chandler did. He KO'd him in the 3rd round, and then he won his last fight. So his biggest win, in my opinion, is not even Dan Hooker the last couple years. I think his biggest win was against Beneil Dariush back in 2017. He also beat Anthony Pettis in 2016. Maybe he's a has-been here, but still 35 years old, rather young here, very experienced, and this Shane guy's coming in who's only 13-2. He lost to Kelvin Kattar. He lost his last fight to Josh Emmett, and he's the favorite here. I don't even recognize some of the guys that he's beaten. So, in my opinion, Edson Barboza is the clear side for me. And this would be a premium play that I will be giving out on this podcast here. I'm going to be taking the short dog here at plus 115. If you had a chance to look at it.
I was leaning this direction. I didn't get a chance to take a deep look at it either. But I saw value on this as well because we have a bunch of dogs that I would probably think are actually going to win the fights. Barboza can always catch you with one of those high kicks, and I could see kind of the way this fight goes is I could see Burgos. Did I say his name?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, I could see him, attacking, thinking that he's an aggressive fighter, so he's gonna, think that he can take out Barboza. And I know that the total line is juiced, but if your book allows you to parlay it, I think that Edson Barboza win and then the over, or maybe just look at the over is a good look too. I don't think either one of these guys are going to give up. But I think the better pick is what you already said, Edson Barboza, because he can catch you with one of those kicks, and he's not going to go anywhere. Right? He's not going to fear this guy at all. He's been through the ringer throughout his career with who he's fought. So I love your ankle.
All right, my man. Well, we have time for one more fight. Why don't you pick one and let me know if you have any plays on it.
Yeah. So I haven't taken a deep look into anything else, but I am thinking about Antonina Shevchenko, the lesser-known sister of the champ. But she's going to approach this fight more. She's more rangy and she's going to be more aggressive than Andrea Lee. I think the UFC wants Antonina to get a win here. I don't know if she won her last fight, but I know she had like 2 losses in a row, 2 or 3 in a row at one point. This is a good fight for her, and I'm seeing it right now, at least at Bovada. It's at minus 125. That's a pretty decent value and could be a good parlay leg as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that's funny. It's like the lesser Shevchenko here, and what's funny is she is. No, she's the older sister. Yeah. That's the funny. Valentina's the younger sister. You would think the older one's usually better, but no. I think you're right. I did look at that fight, and I had a strong lean to her as well. So, I think the UFC needs better female fighters, and they need names. And that's not saying that they're going to cheat for her or anything, but she's coming into this fight against Andrea Lee, and Lee. nothing spectacular about her. She's 11-5 herself. Not a great necessarily fight record against big names. I think Antonina's fought in some bigger names than she has. So, in my opinion, you would be on the right side there. Is she favored here? I have to take a look here again.
Yeah, slight favorite on my end.
Yeah, I'm at bestfightodds.com. She's a slight favorite too. At minus 125, I have no problem throwing a unit on there myself. So, liking that, my man. I have one for tomorrow. We're out of time. So tomorrow I'm going to try to give it to you guys during the Preakness podcast. Chris, man, thank you so much for coming on and discussing your knowledge of the NBA, giving us some free plays and everything. Thank you for everything you do at the Odds Breakers too, man, because you've been crushing it. We're getting such great feedback on Twitter and other social media areas, emails. Congratulations on your success.
I mean, truly, Kiev, a dream come true for me to even be able to, be on your side and write for it. So very grateful to you and for all these opportunities. And hopefully this, as long as I keep that 57 to 58% going, I'll be happy. I expect a lot out of myself now. So I appreciate you having me on today.
All right, Chris. Well, hey, have a great weekend. We'll be texting. A huge thanks to Chris Farley for coming on the show, explaining how he handicaps the NBA and talking about some UFC. Make sure you follow Chris. You can find him at theoddsbreakers.com. Everybody enjoy the rest of your week. We're going to talk to you soon about the Preakness, a little bit more UFC 262, and go get some winners.